So I'm Sebe Brown. I'm the research and extension field crop entomologist for the University of Tennessee, stationed at the West Tennessee Research and Extension Center in Jackson, Tennessee. There's my cell phone number. If you have any questions, please feel free to call me. I'm happy to help. My email address is beneath that as well. And like I said, I'm with Extension, we work for y'all. So please feel free to call me if you have any questions. So I'm going to get started with something we don't see very often in entomology is a new insecticide. This insecticide is something I've looked at for about the last 5 years. It's essentially a new active ingredient that's being released by Syngenta, and it's got activity on a pretty broad range of pests. These include spider mites, plant bugs, and stink bugs. Um, I don't see that it's going to have quite a great fit in corn and soybeans. I think it's going to have a better fit in the southern delta and the southern mid-south, not quite as high, quite as north as Tennessee is, because the pest issues that Tennessee growers face can oftentimes be resolved with a very cheap insecticide such as a pyrethroid. So I don't really think it's going to have a great fit in Tennessee, but at the same time, I mean, it is a new active, and so it's going to have a better fit in cotton than I think anywhere else. If you keep up with modes of action, it is a group 30 mode of action, and which is relatively new. And it's something that, it's impressive. It's got a very long residual control of the target insects, and it's something that I'm very glad that we have in our toolbox, and especially as in the field of entomology, we don't have a whole lot of new active ingredients that we can really use and rely on when it comes to terms for insect control. So it's very exciting. Okay. All right. So moving on to corn, some early season corn issues from an entomological standpoint. That's going to be one of the hardest part of getting corn up and out of the ground. And that's going to be one of the biggest challenges for entomology. And so that's why seed treatment selection is going to be important. Using a robust insecticide seed treatment is going to be important, especially in, corn behind corn, no-till situations, cover crop situations, which pretty much describes the growing conditions and how Tennessee corn is grown. And so this picture is a field of corn that I took in North Louisiana before I left. And what happened was the grower had grown corn behind corn for several years. I think in 5, 6, 7 years in a row. He used Cruiser 250, which is pretty much the seed treatment that came on the seed from the factory. And there was a very wet spring. The field stayed waterlogged, and you can kind of see in the picture the waterlogged areas of the field. They're in the lower spots. And what happened was the seed treatment actually leached off the seed coat, and wireworms moved in and absolutely just destroyed this stand. And you can see some of the damage here on this corn seed, where it looks like there's a hole at the growing point of this corn plant. That's exactly what wireworms do. It's like someone takes a pencil and punches a hole in the growing point and kills it. All right, so this is some damage that wireworms can cause, what we call these dead hearts. And you can see the wireworm in the hole next to the corn plant of a very obvious dead heart. And then there's one next to it. So, dead hearts are, the growing points being killed out of the plant. Several insects can cause this: wireworm, sugarcane beetle. You got grubs. There's a lot of insects that cause what calls these dead hearts. So if you see dead hearts in the field, especially if you're walking down a row and you see, 1 or 2 dead hearts and then a couple live plants and then 1 or 2 more dead hearts, that's going to be pretty conspicuous insect injury. And sorry, my computer's kind of have a mind of its own today a little bit. So moving on is going to be sugarcane beetles. Sugarcane beetles are going to be not nearly as I'm not going to say wireworms are predictable. Sugarcane beetles definitely aren't, but wireworms don't really move. Wireworms are going to be, at least the corn damaging version, the immatures, live beneath the soil surface. They don't move they don't move because they don't have wings and they're grubs. So these guys are very mobile. They get up and they move very easily. They're strong flyers. They're pretty robust beetles. You can see in this picture, you see the damage that these insects cause. It's not just looks like somebody took a pencil and killed the growing point. This is actually going to looks like somebody took a drill bit and drilled into it. And so um, where you want to go with wireworm, well, and sugarcane beetle control is you want to go with high rates of poncho, 500 plus. 1250 is ideal for sugarcane beetle. 500 is adequate for wireworms. You can also get away most of the time with poncho 250. I like poncho 500, especially, and this was based on my data in Louisiana, and we had a little bit more tillage. We rotated quite often, and so that was something that that I recommended. So moving on, this is stink bug damage, and so this is something every cornfield I walk in, whether it will be in Tennessee or in Louisiana, had some form of stink bug damage on it. This field, this was on the edge of the field, and it was probably done by maybe 1 or 2 stink bugs, and this damage occurred roughly, I'd say 7 to 10 days prior to this picture being taken. So if you walk out into a field and you think you need to spray that, don't, because that would be a revenge spray, and you're not killing the insect that actually caused the damage. That damage happened prior to this. So just keep in mind that this damage is rarely, if ever, economical. You'll typically see it on field edges. If you go 10 to 20 rows into the field, it typically falls off. So we hardly ever see any economic yield loss from stink bug injury like this. Excuse me. Let's see. All right. So looking at this is some of Scott Stewart's data out of Milan, just showing the benefit of the seed treatments in corn. And so you can see kind of this light blue bar at the bottom. That's the non-treated control. And, that's no seed treatment. He was getting, 220 bushels an acre, very respectable. But where he used a robust seed treatment, Cruiser 1250, he upped that to almost 40 bushels to 260. Where he used Poncho 1250, he was over 250, 250 bushels. And so, where he used good seed treatments, he saw a significant increase in yield. Now, this is not something you're going to see every year, but at the same time, Tennessee production systems are going to benefit, especially corn, from seed treatments. You have, a lot of high residue. You've got specifically cover crops as well, and you've got a lot of no-till. So that's a very good recipe for developing below ground insects, and especially in corn. And so utilizing a good seed treatment, potentially not just using the one that comes from the factory, especially if you're corn behind corn, or, if that's going to be the ones that, you really need to think about. Think about going, upping your seed treatment. And this is just kind of a summary of seed treatments. Just take home kind of what I've already said. Consider using higher seed treatment rates in these certain circumstances. And if you still use in-furrow applications, so if you still have granular or liquid rigs, that's also an option. And if you do use, say, bifenthrin squirted in furrow, you can go with the absolute lowest seed treatment that comes from the factory, because there's no seed treatment that is going to really outperform an in-furrow. I mean, that's something I've never seen that in my career, where especially like an in-furrow bifenthrin or even a counter or a force, those are absolutely work the best, outside of seed treatments. Let's see. All right, so a quick word on Southwestern European corn borers. This is, if you're planting BT hybrids, these are no longer an issue. I mean, BT has done a very good job controlling these insects. But if you are growing non-BT, or you're looking at concerned about your refuge, your structured refuge, which is federally required, unless you're doing refuge in a bag in the corn growing counties, on your non-BT, you need to look on the underside for eggs. Tasseling corn, start looking for feeding scars. And so kind of before I back up, these are the eggs of a southwestern corn borer. You kind of see up here in this top right-hand corner, these are the eggs of your southwesterns. They're very unusual. No other insect eggs look like that in corn. Very, they're easy to see. And once you see them, you won't forget them. And then these are the European corn borer. They're a little bit harder to see, not quite, quite as conspicuous, but it also something easy to see when you get out there and scout. So look for larvae found between the husks and the collars. That's going to be the easiest way to scout. You see feeding scars, start looking between the husks and the collars. And then your southwesterns, our threshold is 5% or more plants have eggs. That's before tassel. At tassel to R3, 10% or more of your plants have eggs or larvae. And then 50% with European corn borer, 50% of plants are infested and one or more egg masses per plant. Pheromone trap catches. I know all the county agents, if you have a county agent, your county will typically get a hold of pheromone traps that we can supply, that my entomology program will supply you or the county agent. And pheromone trapping is also another great way to forecast southwestern corn borer potential influxes or migrations into a cornfield. And so that's also works very well. And you take an average over a 7-day span. And if you're catching over a certain number of moths, then you know that they're in there laying eggs and you need to make an application. So that's also another option, is using trapping, which works very well. Okay. So looking at moving into soybeans, these are bean leaf beetles. Bean leaf beetle injury looks, it can cause some shot hole symptoms, looks bad in beans, especially if you take a look here. This is a soy on your left. This is an insecticide seed treatment versus on your right. This is no seed treatment. Now, I know this looks pretty bad, but you're not going to experience any yield loss from this. Soybeans at this stage need to be defoliated literally 100%, and they need to eat the growing point out of it where you see any significant yield loss. What can cause yield loss, though? Southern corn rootworm, I've seen cause some significant yield loss, as well as grape colaspis. And we see that from stand loss. And so where you start to see insects causing stand loss, that's when you start seeing your yield penalty in soybeans. And so utilizing a seed treatment is going to help protect against those two insects. However, it's hard for us to show an economic benefit to soybean seed treatments. This, again, is Scott's data out of, I believe this is out of Milan. This is no-till, and he did not see a significant increase where he used a seed treatment versus not. We see significant stand protection from a fungicide seed treatment, but for yield increases, it's really hard for us to show that, especially when it's planted in a timely fashion. May 11th is not considered ultra late, is not considered really late for planting soybeans, and so we didn't see the benefit. Now, if you were to plant very early, let's say you're bumping April, or it's cold, it's wet, soybeans are stagnant, they're not moving very much, planting very, very late, like behind wheat, you've got a more incidence of insects out that stage, either very early or very late, that can cause yield loss. Also behind cover crops. And so if you have a cover crop, that's also an issue where seed treatment needs to be, you need a good seed treatment. But it's hard for us to really show an economic yield benefit where we use seed treatments in soybeans. However, as an entomologist, I typically recommend seed treatments just because the sheer fact that we can't predict the weather, and soybean seed costs are going up. And so every seed you put in the ground, if it doesn't come up, that's money you lose. And so, soybean seed treatments are typically cheap enough. They're a couple dollars an acre that, it's easy. And I don't want to call it insurance, but I've seen, in my career as an entomologist, I've seen just complete stand loss from some of these insects. And it's a whole lot more expensive to replant the beans than it would be to use a seed treatment. And that's something that, growers have said that to me over and over again. It's like, I should have spent the money on a seed treatment, and I didn't. And so, and just to kind of reiterate that, soybean has one of the largest planting windows of any agronomic crop we grow across the Mid-South. And so, a lot of people plant soybeans early. And the thing with planting early soybeans is the temperature that causes soybeans to stop growing is not is not cold enough to stop insects. Now, if it's, if we get a cold 30, 38, 39-degree night, that's enough to slow insect movement down. But if you've got a 50-degree day, soybeans are not going to grow very quickly in 50-degree air temperatures. But insects, that is enough temperature to make insects move. Bean leaf beetles, you've got southern corn rootworm will be moving in that temperature. A lot of our insects, if you get any kind of sun and a little bit of heat, they will up and start moving. So that's why I typically try to recommend seed treatments in beans, especially if you're planting on the very early, very late window. And rate, it's a buyer's market. Standard rates are good enough. You don't have to overtreat, and then it's whatever you can afford. Whatever the cheapest option you can find will be good enough. All right, so looking at soybean defoliators, keep your defoliation below 20% after R1. So once you see a flower, keep that defoliation low, because that's when you start seeing yield loss. Resistant loopers are increasing. So if you use diamide chemistries, so like Prevathon, Besiege, Vantacor, Elevest, those rates are not going to work as well as they used to, because they're starting to see resistance. Velvet bean and clover worms are susceptible to pyrethroids, so they're very easy to control. And then armyworms. I've been getting a lot of questions. Are armyworms going to be as bad in 22 as they were in 21? The answer is it's really hard to say, because they don't overwinter in Tennessee. Armyworms originate from South Texas, Mexico, South Florida, Puerto Rico, and the armyworms that we get are typically originating out of Texas, and so, or Mexico. So it's really hard to see what's going on, what factors influence them, and it would be what's going on now. And so typically when you have a warm spring that you see a lot of rain, where it's, it warms up and then it rains, and then it dries out and it warms up and it rains, that's typically favors large worm outbreaks. And so don't think that weather pattern has really held this year. And so, it's hard to say. I hate making predictions as an entomologist, because insects make a liar out of me. So that was a once in a career thing. Hopefully we won't see that again. And we're just, but we are prepared. If they do come along, we do have chemical control options to help control them. And we do have things that work very well. Sorry, my computer has a mind of its own today for whatever reason. And just really quick, I'm going to touch on wheat. So some data that Scott Stewart has showed very conclusively over the years is that management of aphid infestations, especially in the winter to late winter application window of a pyrethroid, increases, yield by 5.7 bushels to the acre. And so basically what that means is you come out and you can, if you're applying your foliar fertilizer, or you're just making a dedicated application, if you typically spray in the January to February window and you use a cheap pyrethroid, we're talking $1, maybe $2 an acre, that, controlling those aphids that come in that spread barley yellow dwarf will help pick up on average of 5.7 bushels to the acre. So it really seems to make, it makes a difference. You're killing these aphids. You're not allowing them to spread barley yellow dwarf, which is a proven yield limiter in Tennessee wheat. And it's something that has been proven. We're going to continue looking at this, and it's a best management recommended practice that we have here at the University of Tennessee. And so again, this is my cell phone number, and that's my email address. Please feel free to call me. If you ever need anything, or shoot me an email, and I will be happy to help you all in any way I can. Thank you.